Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:09 p.m. in Central Europe. I need hardly add that it is so cold and it's so miserable and it's so dismal that you kind of want to be somewhere else. So that's your immediate instinct. At the moment, it's even colder here in Budapest than it is in Moscow. Not only is it dark, and that it gets dark at lunchtime, but the streets are very poorly lit. So if you ride your bicycle like I do, you're always taking your life in your own hands. I mean, every day you do it, you take your life in your own hands because it's just so dark. However, on a cheery note, thank you everybody who has joined me. I really appreciate it. And of course, the topic that we're going to start off discussing is the Trump appointments. Now, at this moment that we're speaking, it hasn't yet been confirmed that Trump will name Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. So at this stage, that still isn't a certainty. And but what we do know is that Mike Waltz has been appointed as National Security Advisor, and we know that Ambassador to the UN will be Elise Stefanik, formerly of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, a neocon outfit, and formerly of Bill Kristol's Democracy Initiative, or whatever it was called, Foreign Policy Initiative. I can't remember. Whatever is Bill Kristol, it's an awful thing, and so that's the origin of where she came from. She managed to worm her way in with Trump, and now has been rewarded. And then we also have Mike Huckabee, the former governor of Arkansas, has been named as U.S. ambassador to Israel. He's a fanatical follower of Israel. He's an evangelical Christian, really, really passionate about Israel, and really passionate in his hatred for Iran. And so then we're left with the Secretary of State thing, but still, I haven't heard anyone saying that it won't be Marco Rubio. Now, the first thing that struck me about these appointments is that this is far more conventional Republican, neocon, orthodox foreign policy thinking than displayed by Trump during his first term. And we've been told in the last few days that Trump's second term will be nothing like his first term. He's learned from his mistakes. He's not going to do any of the bad things that he did during his first term. But if you go back to the first term, he appointed Michael Flynn as his national security advisor. Now, Michael Flynn had established himself as obviously he was a three-star general, but he was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he was the one who was writing these reports about Syria, in which he pointed out that basically the U.S. government, the Obama administration, was facilitating the rise of ISIS. We know that that's true, and other people have reported it, but this is the U.S., the DIA of the United States government, was reporting that the United States was essentially in bed with ISIS. And which is why Barack Obama set out to destroy him. And that Barack Obama, in his meeting after the 2016 election, in his meeting in the Oval Office with Trump, told him, well, stay the hell away from Michael Flynn. He's really bad news. You want to stay away from Flynn. Flynn also showed that he was kind of level-headed when he came to relations with Russia. You obviously, you recall he went to Russia for that was the 10, was it the 10-year? Yeah, it was the 10-year anniversary of the founding of RT, and he gave a speech there. And Obama, who was obviously laying traps for the incoming Trump administration, uh, tried to sabotage any possible rapprochement with Russia by, completely without any evidence, accusing Russia of having interfered in the 2016 election, and then imposing sanctions on Russia, and then, of course, um, expelling Russian diplomats from the United States and closing a number of diplomatic compounds in the United States. So that was just really days before Trump was to take over. And then Flynn spoke on the phone with the Russian ambassador to the United States, was Dmitry Kislyak. And he said to Kislyak that, well, don't overreact. There's a new team is coming in. We're going to re-examine foreign policy, and so just we understand you're going to have to do what you do, which is reciprocate, but don't go overboard. This, of course, this was being eavesdropped by the NSA, which was then leaked to David Ignatius of the Washington Post, who wrote, this ridiculous, hysterical article that supposedly Michael Flynn was in violation of the Logan Act in having this conversation with Kislyak, whereas in fact Flynn was just being perfectly sensible and saying, "Don't overreact. There's a new team coming in. We're going to re-examine the foreign policy of the United States." But he said that, they laid a trap for him by supposedly they asked Flynn. This was said by Mike Pence, the incoming vice president. He asked Michael Flynn, "Hey, did you discuss sanctions with Kislyak?" And Flynn correctly said he didn't discuss sanctions, because he didn't discuss sanctions. He just discussed the expulsion of the diplomats. But that thing that the people who claim to have seen the transcript of the conversation said, "Oh, no, that's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. Flynn was lying." But of course, Flynn wasn't lying. Flynn did not discuss sanctions. Anyone can see the transcript, what the transcripts that have been released, that he did not discuss sanctions. He just discussed the expulsion of diplomats. But either way, that was it. Trump blew it, completely bungled it. He simply was unprepared for this operation, an Obama-led operation against Flynn. And Trump really never really recovered from the firing of Flynn. Flynn was gone really within a few weeks, and he appointed a whole series of ridiculous national security advisors: McMaster, Bolton, O'Brien, very, very conventional foreign policy types. Just full of the conventional parties. Flynn was something different. But anyway, that was his appointment of Flynn, and then he appointed as his Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Now, Rex Tillerson, I mean, no one had ever heard of him. But he didn't come from the foreign policy swamp. I mean, he was CEO of ExxonMobil, so he was somebody who with an expertise in the energy industry. He had dealt with Russia, obviously, and so clearly, we thought with those appointments, Flynn, Tillerson, that Trump is going to re-examine relations with Russia. That here's somebody that doesn't have any of this obsessive hatred. Flynn doesn't have an obsessive hatred of Russia, and then Tillerson is someone who has worked with Russia. Being with ExxonMobil, he obviously has no hatred for Russia. The Tillerson thing turned out to be a disaster. He didn't hit it off with Trump and so on. Now, the question then is, these appointments that he's done now are very, very conventional. This is real foreign policy orthodoxy 101. I mean, these are people who haven't had any original foreign policy ideas at all. They spew the very familiar nonsense. Now, it's true that Rubio did not support the Biden's, whatever it was, $100 billion package. But if you recall, the reason Rubio did not support it was that he didn't think that he did enough on the border. Remember, it was all part of a bill with the border and everything else. He said he didn't do enough to support, didn't do enough about the U.S. border with Mexico. That's the reason Rubio voted against it. Rubio did not have any issue at all with sending money to Israel, obviously not, and he didn't have any issue about sending money to Ukraine. And so but since the aid bill passed the Senate comfortably, or whatever, I think it was 78-22, it was no big deal for Rubio to vote against. I mean, it was held up in the House, but it was an easy enough vote for Rubio. And it's true that Rubio has recently said, well, we need to come to some kind of a negotiated outcome in Ukraine, but he just left it very vague. What that tells us is that, but remember, Rubio also sponsored the legislation, almost certainly unconstitutional legislation, preventing a president from withdrawing from NATO. I think it was the Kane-Rubio bill, which somehow passed overwhelmingly, that to prevent a U.S. president from withdrawing the United States from NATO. Now, as I say, it's unconstitutional. I don't think Congress can't put any kinds of restrictions on what a U.S. president can or cannot do. I mean, if a U.S. president can just walk away from treaties, he's done that before. I mean, you had Trump in his previous term. He walked out of the INF treaty, and then Obama never bothered to ratify the JCPOA, but nonetheless, he said we would observe it. And then, Jimmy Carter didn't bother to ratify SALT II, but he said we will observe it. So if the president can do that, he can certainly walk out on a treaty. I mean, it's obviously it's completely nonsensical, but nonetheless, it was Rubio who sponsored that legislation. So Rubio is really part of the swamp. I mean, it is the foreign policy swamp of interventionism, neo-Cold Warriorism. NATO is glorious, and again, nothing at all in his career would suggest that he's going to rethink, re-examine any of American foreign policy assumptions. So the people who said this, the people who were saying that Trump is going to come in and he's going to shake things up, he's going to do this and this on foreign policy, were wrong. And it was obvious that they were wrong because Trump never said, at no time did he say on the trail that he was going to cut Ukraine off, that he was going to somehow work out a deal with Russia to bring this the war in Ukraine to an end. He never said that. All he said was, hey, it didn't happen on my watch, and it wouldn't have happened. And in fact, the reason he always adduced as to why it didn't happen on his watch was that, well, Putin was afraid of me. I said to him, Vladimir, don't you do anything. Don't you touch Ukraine, because, we're going to, bomb those beautiful uh, turrets of the Kremlin over your head. Um, whether he said that or didn't say that doesn't matter. That's what he said on the campaign trail. So he gave no reason. Again, there's a lot of wishful thinking in MAGA world, in the alt media, who somehow attributed to Trump the policy prescriptions that they wanted him to adopt. Oh, that he will actually do this. This is what Trump will do. And the thing to remember, you can't emphasize this enough, is that there's no reason for Trump to do this. There's really no real reason for Trump to do Russia any favors. And I mean, I've said this before. I mean, it's in a sense, Russia has got itself into this position because it has failed to wrap this war up, to finish this war off. And so therefore, basically, Russia is in a very difficult spot. I mean, it's losing lives. I mean, obviously, Ukraine is obviously losing an enormous number of lives, but Russia's also losing lives and doesn't have any obvious way of bringing this war to an end, other than, Ukraine will collapse, but we've been hearing this, Ukraine will collapse. At some point, Ukraine will collapse. Well, maybe it will. But it hasn't happened yet, and it's now 3 years, and so therefore we can't just work on the operating assumption that Ukraine will collapse. Russia, which is 5 times the size of Ukraine, should have been able to finish this war off and to bring this about a collapse of Ukraine. So therefore, to the extent that Russia was thinking that somehow Trump will succeed in doing something, well, I think those hopes have been dashed, because Trump has no real intention of doing anything like this. But what about China? Okay, maybe Trump would like Russia to help out on China, but Trump probably doesn't think he needs Russia. He probably thinks that essentially, he's got Russia tied down, bogged down in this war. That kind of eliminates Russia as any kind of a geopolitical rival. He probably thinks, we've got enough resources within NATO, within all of our global alliances, to deal with China. We don't really need Russia. So this team is hawkish on China, which is all that Trump really wanted. He wants them to be hawkish on China, so they are hawkish on China, and they're hawkish on Russia. And Trump thinks, why should I do anything for Russia? I mean, I'm president of the United States. I mean, why should I do any favors at all to Russia? And that's it's a perfectly realistic position to take. I mean, you say, well, if Russia can bring about a victory over Ukraine, bring Ukraine to its knees, okay, we'll do it. But the notion that somehow America is desperate to bring this war to an end, there's just no basis for it. There's no basis at all for it. Now, we've had these predictions. Biden's going to do this, and Blinken's going to do that, and they're going to put pressure. They're going to throw Zelensky under the bus, and they're going to wrap it up. The grown-ups in the room are going to close this. And strangely enough, it never happens. And why doesn't it happen? Because America doesn't really care. I mean, it's Russians who are dying, Ukrainians who are dying, Slavs who are dying. What does America care? Americans aren't dying. If Americans were dying, that's a different issue. But Americans are not dying. Germans are not dying. Frenchmen are not dying. Brits are not dying. It's just Slavs who are dying. So what's the urgency of bringing this war to an end? So that's why Trump has put in place China hawks, and there also happen to be Russia hawks. And as I've said before, I think that Trump will put forward a peace plan, or the peace plan, something along the lines that the media have speculated, which is freeze the fighting in place. Um, Ukraine, no NATO membership for Ukraine for 20 years, and in the meantime, the United States is going to pour, weaponry into Ukraine. 20 years are going to just keep pouring and pouring and pouring weapons into Ukraine. I mean, it really will be like a sinking aircraft carrier. There'll be that on Ukraine. Now, it's a bad deal for Russia, very bad deal for Russia, because Russia will have achieved nothing, will not have achieved any of its goals that it set out at the start of the so-called SMO. It hasn't liberated the Donbass. I mean, it's liberated almost all of Lugansk, but not entirely. But it hasn't liberated Donetsk, hasn't liberated Kherson, hasn't liberated Zaporozhye. And with a freeze in place, Ukraine would just simply basically be rearming, get all set for round two 10 years down the road. It's hard for Russia to say that somehow the sacrifice of so many lives was worth this. So I think Russia will turn it down. I think Ukraine will also turn it down, because Ukraine essentially would be asked to give up on Ukrainian territory. So then what happens? Now, Trump can't do nothing. I mean, he can't just simply continue with the policy that Biden had. Biden basically didn't do anything. I mean, Biden just, other than Ukraine. I mean, Biden never put forward a peace plan or anything like that. I mean, he was just happy to keep arming Ukraine. Trump can't quite do that, because Trump made this promise. He's repeatedly made this promise that he's going to bring this war to an end. So he can't just continue as before. So he's obviously, first thing he does, I think, is to present a peace plan. It then gets rejected, and then he escalates. He's not going to pull the plug on Ukraine. I mean, anyone who thinks that he's going to go to Zelensky and say, "Oh, sorry, Vladimir, we've got bigger fish to fry. We're concentrating on China, so I'm afraid you're done. You're just going to have to accept Russia's terms, and that's it. We're not giving you another dime. We're not giving you another artillery shell, not another revolver. I'm sorry, that's it. You're done." It's not going to happen. It is not going to happen. Trump is not going to pull the plug on Ukraine. He has surrounded himself with very conventional, orthodox Washington types, and they will persuade him, why should we do this? Why should we do any favors for Russia? Russia would like us to do this. Obviously, they want us to do this. But why should we do it? If these idiots want to go on killing each other, by the hundreds of thousands, they want to do it, well, let them do it. No skin off our nose. We can go on facilitating it. You have to give Trump what's the incentive for Trump to help out Russia? I don't see it. As I said, you could they're going to use Russia against China, but he'll say, I don't need Russia. I can deal with China. I've got enough allies here with NATO, with all these states in the in the Far East. I got India batting with me. I really don't need Russia. So he's going to say, what for? So that's why I think what he will do once the peace plan is rejected, he will escalate against Russia. Now, what does that amount to? I don't think it probably doesn't amount to much more than what Biden did. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe he will take the restraints off the use of missiles on Russian territory. But I think Biden is going to do that before he exits the door. I think just to make things as difficult as possible for Trump, and then you just continue. I mean, it's so the war will go on, and um, and that makes it very difficult for Russia, because I think Russia was somehow counting on Trump, much as it was counting on Trump in 2016. It's counting again on Trump, that he's going to re-examine everything with a fresh set of eyes. Which it's clear from even from these early appointments, he has no intention of re-examining anything. It's this is an extremely conventional, hardline, orthodox, hawkish administration. You can't get more hawkish than this. Now, if he appoints Tulsi Gabbard as Pentagon chief, maybe we can then discuss. Well, maybe who knows what that is. But ultimately, if you're Pentagon chief, you still don't make foreign policy. Foreign policy is made by the White House, which means that that would be Trump and Waltz, and by the State Department. But more Trump and Waltz. Now, Waltz is this is a Bush Cheney alone. Remember, he's a Green Beret. Was in the special services. He then worked in the Pentagon. Worked under Bob Gates in the Pentagon, and then he worked in the White House directly for Dick Cheney. He was the counterterrorism chief for Dick Cheney. So, I mean, if you're planning on moving away from the Bush Cheney era, you don't hire someone who directly worked for Dick Cheney. And Rubio was the neocon's neocon. I remember when he was elected in 2010. He was part of the Tea Party wave, and then immediately he got on board with amnesty, with Obama's amnesty. Remember, he was one of the 13 Republican senators who were ready to sign on to Obama's comprehensive immigration reform, which was very close to passing. That was a big deal for Obama. It was very close to passing. It was only because Eric Cantor, who was the number 2 man among the House Republicans, he lost his primary to Dave Bratt on the issue of immigration, that the House Republicans panicked, and so they didn't pass this comprehensive immigration reform. But the point is that Rubio, having been this the tough guy, he was this the guy who was as I say, the Tea Party person, and was against immigration, immediately sold out and said he would support Obama's comprehensive immigration reform. So Rubio, that really damaged Rubio, because then when Rubio and the neocons were all championing Rubio in 2015, this was brought up against him, and Rubio again never really recovered from that. It seemed like he got very depressed. He did very poorly in those primaries, and you remember he was at one stage. It seemed like he was going to quit politics. He was planning not to run for re-election in 2016 to the Senate. So he had to be talked into running for re-election by Trump, and so. But the point was that the neocons absolutely adored Rubio, because they thought, hey, this guy is a great super neocon. So if you're going to bring him in, you're going to as Secretary of State, and then you got Mike Waltz as your national security. Well, that's it. I mean, the foreign policy is cast, and all the people who were predicting that somehow Trump was going to reimagine foreign policy. He was going to do, this is going to be very different from the first term. are wrong. It's different from the first. I mean, that there's no pretense. There's no pretense at all on his part of departing from foreign policy orthodoxy. As I said, initially at least, when he hired Michael Flynn and Rex Tillerson, it seemed like Trump wanted to rethink things. And now when it comes to the Middle East, I mean, when you hire Elise Stefanik, as I say, Stefanik, she was at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is that's a real neocon's outfit. And then she worked for Bill Kristol at the Foreign Policy Initiative, and they got her her seat in Congress. But she was loyal and to Trump. She did very well in the impeachment proceedings, and then they got that attracted Trump. I mean, look, on other things that Trump intends to do, I think that's fine. I mean, I think Tom Homan as border czar, I think that's good. I think America has to address the immigration problem. I mean, I think that could work. Though I'm not quite sure. Somebody has to explain to me why Kristi Noem is Homeland Secretary. I don't get that. I don't. What's her expertise on border security issues? I don't get Kristi Noem. And in every way, Kristi Noem seems very. I mean, again, she's very nice looking. You have to give her that. She's nice looking. Obviously, works out in the gym religiously. You can see her well-defined muscular arms. But otherwise, I don't get why Noam gets this this elevated position. So there. But and then we'll see what happens in the Justice Department, because as we were discussing yesterday on the live stream with Peter, that everything that happened, like the Russiagate, all that has to be brought out into the open. That's going to be up to the Justice Department. Has to really move on that. The Jack Smith prosecutions, Biden's role in that, I think all that has to be brought out into the open. So that's very good. I mean, if Trump can move on those things, get somebody very tough in the Justice Department who's going to be determined to expose the skullduggery within Obama, because we have to find out Obama's role, because Obama was the one who launched Russiagate, and then it was continued by Biden. So all that has to be exposed. And Trump failed to do that during his first term. He was very weak. He didn't hire good attorneys general. And but this time, he's going to be absolutely determined, declassify everything, all the Crossfire Hurricane documents and everything else that pertains to Russiagate. All that has to be exposed. And again, the Jack Smith prosecutions, all the prosecutorial abuse, that has to be exposed. So that part is good. I mean, yeah. But when it comes to the Middle East, and now that Trump has so identified himself with Israel, then the speculation that he's going to take a look with a fresh pair of eyes on the Middle East, he'll decide that just maybe the Palestinians deserve something. That just maybe the United States shouldn't be so one-sided in its approach to the Middle East. That isn't going to happen. I mean, once you've got let's say Rubio at State, you've got Huckabee in Israel, you've got Stefanik in New York. I mean, the die is cast. I mean, that's just you're not going to say, well, but I kind of think that maybe the Palestinians have been getting a rather rough treatment. And, I think it's time to re-examine. Anyway, let's take a look at some of the comments. First of all, we'll look at the Locals Board, which is our loyal subscribers. which and I encourage everybody, everyone who's on YouTube, on Rumble, to please subscribe. You don't have to pay if you don't have the money, but please subscribe. There's a lot of things happening. It's a great community. It's always something interesting. And one of the people who makes it very interesting is the first person who's got a question, which is Denaki. Denaki, thank you so much. Again, thank you for all of your great postings. So it says, Kedvesh George, what was that famous W saying? Fool me once, shame on fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. I mean, you can't get fooled again. It's very funny that people always get that wrong. It's not. It isn't really that difficult. But you're right. Like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Very very nice. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, you can't get fooled again. Rubio at State, that war hawk for national security advisor. But hey, Pompeo and Haley are out. Let's celebrate the draining swamp. Well, yeah, I mean, I talked about that. But what's interesting is that Trump made this grand, I don't know, I don't know if you can call it tweet or truth, a message. He did it on Sunday or Saturday evening, I guess, where he says, well, Nikki Haley and Pompeo will not be taking part in this administration. And there was a lot of rejoicing about that. And I thought, whoa, this is good news. But that was just a feint. It was a strategic feint, because it's hard to see how Elise Stefanik is as an improvement on Nikki Haley. I mean, obviously she's smarter than Nikki Haley. I mean, there's no question about that. She's an intelligent woman. But in terms of worldview, she sees her role in exactly the same way that Nikki Haley saw her role, which is you go to New York and you are there to champion Israel. And you are there to defend Israel from all the horrible, terrible third world despots, whatever they call them. Third world despots are always ganging up on Israel. That Nikki Haley was very upfront about it. That's her job. And given Stefanik's ardent, passionate, of long-standing passionate. I mean, Haley was just an opportunist. I mean, Haley, was just, she didn't really believe anything. I think she was just thinking about her career. That's a little different from Stefanik. I mean, Stefanik is an ardent Zionist, and that's how she sees her job. And as I was saying, yesterday, I mean that it's one U.S. ambassador to the UN after another sees her role as championing Israel. Now, admittedly, that wasn't quite the case under Obama. I mean, I think both Samantha Power and Susan Rice knew that Obama wasn't a huge fan of Israel, but when it comes to Republicans, then absolutely, when whoever the Republicans sent to New York sees her role as the champion of Israel. So, like, whether it was John Bolton or Jean Kirkpatrick, and then of course, as I said, the granddaddy of them all, the one who really started it, because up until then it wasn't really a big deal, that position. I mean, no one really cared that much about the U.S. ambassador to the UN. It's a kind of a perk you get towards the end of your career, like Adlai Stevenson was the U.S. ambassador to the UN. Jack Kennedy gave it to him. I mean, the guy had sort of tried to win the Democratic Party nomination. He did win it twice, but lost to Eisenhower. And then he tried it again in 1960, lost to Jack Kennedy. So he got a consolation prize. He got to be U.S. ambassador to the UN. But at the time, it wasn't really such a big deal. But but it was Moynihan who, when he was appointed by Gerald Ford, who saw this as an opportunity to launch his political career, and he did it by essentially becoming the U.S. ambassador for Israel. That's what he is. He went there and did constantly attacked the UN for being so mean to Israel, and that of course helped him in 1976 when he ran for the Senate in New York. And so ever since then, everybody has wanted to do the Moynihan thing, and that's exactly what Stefanik is going to do. All these terrible people who keep ganging up on Israel. Anyway, so now, but when it comes to Pompeo, again, I don't see how Marco Rubio is in any way an improvement on Pompeo. I don't see it, and in this case, Rubio just doesn't have even. I mean, even on a very superficial level, Rubio lacks the sort of the presence that Pompeo had, particularly in those days when Pompeo was quite portly, stout, which he hasn't. He's now kind of very strangely, creepily thin. He's lost so much weight. But when he was Secretary of State, he was very, very much a rotund individual. But at least he had a certain presence. Rubio just doesn't have a presence. I don't know what it is. I mean, he kind of looks like a little boy. In 2016 when he was running for president, it looked so strange. When he would keep saying that I'm the next president of the United States, when he looked like some little schoolboy wearing shorts saying, I'm the next president of the United States. But that was 8 years ago. But he doesn't seem to have added any real gravitas. So it's hard to see that. I mean, in terms of worldview, I don't see any major difference between Rubio and Pompeo. But I think Rubio just lacks the presence of Pompeo. But yeah, I mean, but yeah. So Trump did this. He sends out this message. People get very excited by it. And then whomp, he kind of really laid it on for his followers. Anyway, Judy Hotchkiss, thank you very much, Judy. It's always very good to see you. So Judy says, first, as of now, it's not confirmed. Yeah, I think you're talking about Rubio. Yeah, it hasn't been confirmed. Second, if true, note that Rubio voted against Ukraine war funding in 2024 after voting for it in 2022. Yeah, but as I say, he did it on very technical reasons. I mean, if you actually listen to his speech that he delivered to explain why he wasn't going for it, he explains that it's all really about the border, that there was insufficient money there, insufficient for border security. It wasn't because he was against sending money to Ukraine. It wasn't because he was against sending money to Israel. His issue was that somehow this bill wasn't doing enough about the border. That's the only reason. I mean, but his speech is available on the internet. You can see it. And so yes, he's bad. But it's not helpful to exaggerate, and always beware of how the mainstream media tries to make politicians play fetch. Yeah, I mean, I mean, look, you're right. I mean, but you have to say that if you have Waltz as national security advisor, and then you have Rubio as Secretary of State, then which way is it going to go? I mean, you can have a national security advisor and a Secretary of State who are at loggerheads, and then you can say, well, I don't know, maybe it's going to go this way and it'll go that way. Trump may listen to one, Trump may listen to the other, and you had that before. I mean, like under Jimmy Carter, when you had Zbigniew Brzezinski and Cyrus Vance, but in this case, if it is Rubio, and again, that it's quite possible it's not going to be Rubio, but if it is Rubio and Waltz, then fundamentally you can see which way the it's going to go, which way the foreign policy debate is going to go. I remember Waltz, he's national security advisor. He is going to pick his National Security Council team, so he's going to essentially pick all the hawks to work for him. They will be the ones who will be presenting Trump with his options. That's going to be the key. I mean, the State Department does something, but the State Department does diplomacy. I mean, it does policy as well, but the function of the State Department is to do diplomacy. But in any case, you'd have to say Rubio's track record is one where he's been through, pretty much on with the hawks. So I mean, if there was another voice, then it might be different. I mean, I'd say, look, if Trump tomorrow announces that he's appointing Tulsi Gabbard in defense, she's going to head the Pentagon, then you can say, okay, well, who knows? There's going to be different voices in the administration. But so far, you'd have to say all the people that he has appointed are moving in one direction. You've got you've got the Israel lobby; they're well taken care of. Then you've got Waltz, and then but as I say, we don't know with Rubio, but that's still it's. I mean, if it is Rubio, again, everything is moving in this direction. Steve Brown says, actually, Trump owes much to his Zionist donors in Florida, particularly Miriam Farbstein, also known as Adelson. Yeah, I look. I mean, there's no question about that. But he doesn't need their money now. He's not going to run for re-election. He can't run for re-election, so he doesn't need Miriam Adelson's money, which was a little different from his first term. That's why some of us, I mean, in my more optimistic moments, which is very rare, but in my more optimistic moments, I thought that he'll say, look, I don't need this money anymore. I don't need Miriam Adelson's money anymore. So therefore, I can approach the issue of Israel, in a more heterodox way. In other words, I don't have to buy into or everything that I've been told. I can examine it and say, look, maybe, just maybe, the Palestinians deserve something. And I thought that particularly when he came to Michigan, because that was a big deal, where he had all these imams and Muslim Americans and Arab Americans coming out in support of him. So I thought, well, he might be stirred by that. He might think that these people are really upset. These people are really very agitated about what's going on to the Palestinians. And that's why I thought, well, maybe he's going to look at things very differently. So far, there's very little evidence of this. So because again, he could say, okay, Miriam Adelson, he doesn't need the Adelson money anymore, and if he wants the Republicans to go on winning in Michigan, then maybe that Arab and Muslim vote it's quite important to cultivate it. So that's why I thought maybe he's going to look at it in a different way. Hasn't happened. So we have Stone River says, thank you very much, Stone River. I really appreciate it. You appreciate your generosity. Says, ambassadors to the UN are usually senior career foreign affairs officials. Well, that used to be the case, but that became a quite political position. Um, so they, yeah, or it was. I mean, George H.W. Bush, the older Bush, was ambassador to the UN. Um, I think Nixon appointed him as ambassador to the UN. Um, and um, and so it used to be, it wasn't a particularly coveted job, and a kind of a boring job. Um, but I think it was transformed by Moynihan, and then by well, I'd kind of forgotten that um, was Andy Young. Jimmy Carter appointed. I was trying to recall who was Jimmy Carter's ambassador to the UN. That was Andy Young, but Andy Young did actually, break the mold. I mean, he did hold very unorthodox views on Israel, and it was a controversial appointment, and he survived. He came under a lot of attack, but then he met some. I think he met some Palestinians at the time. The United States did not recognize the PLO in any shape, way, or form, and he met some PLO representatives at the UN, and so Jimmy Carter fired him. But he was quite unorthodox on that issue. But yeah, so from about that time on, from about Moynihan's time on, it's people saw that job as a way to elevate themselves. But Carter, I guess Carter didn't really think that highly of the position. I mean, he just gave it to Andy Young, more or less just to keep the blacks happy. He's given a nice job to the former mayor of Atlanta, kind of a civil rights leader, and so on. But he didn't. I mean, in terms of diplomacy, Andy Young did not do any diplomacy. He was Vance, or of course Zbigniew Brzezinski. But with Gene Kirkpatrick, then it was from then on. Yeah, I got to get that job. But funnily enough, I mean, it's in terms of what you said, it goes to career foreign affairs officials, because I think after Gene Kirkpatrick, I mean, Kirkpatrick wanted to, she thought that she had done really well during Trump's first term as the ambassador to the UN, and she wanted to be Secretary of State. But Reagan didn't really like her very much, and he didn't give her the position of Secretary of State. And then I think Reagan appointed, I think, a career Foreign Service official. He appointed Thomas Pickering to the UN. So he so it was back to being boring again. But yeah, I mean, but it's now. Stefanik is going to do. She's absolutely going to do the what Nikki Haley did. I think what Kirkpatrick did, what Moynihan did. I mean that we know that's exactly what she intends to do, and that's exactly what Trump wants her to do. Anyway, Stone River, thank you so much for your generosity. DJ says about the ambassadors to the senior career foreign affairs officials, also known as sock puppets with googly eyes. Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's one of those things where you can elevate yourself because you make all these speeches, you make all these pronouncements at these Security Council meetings. That gets a nice lot of publicity, but ultimately you don't have any real foreign policy input. I mean, you're told to vote by the people in Washington. Either the president or the Secretary of State tell you how to vote. That's why it was always so hilarious when during the GOP primaries this year, when Nikki Haley was trying to present herself as some kind of a foreign policy specialist, that she's somehow an expert on foreign policy. She alone among the candidates, whether it was Vivek or Ron DeSantis, or Chris Christie, or whoever was there. Well, she has this foreign policy credentials. She had no foreign policy credentials. I mean, well, first of all, she was only there for 18 months before she decided to cash out and make some serious money. But basically, I mean, you're told what to do. You don't have foreign policy officials. I mean, it's like they tell you how to vote, and that's it. So you're not actually in the business of making foreign policy. But so, well, I'm a real foreign policy expert, as if she's some kind of a Zbigniew Brzezinski type. And then Steve Brown says the U.S. electoral system is the epitome of the classic definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over and over again while expecting a different result each time. Yeah. I think it was McGregor bagging on the black pill, but I find the black pill more than satisfying, at least as far as the failed former FD USA EU concerned. Yeah, I mean, I read those stories about how McGregor is slated for a big job. I doubt whether McGregor is going to get anything more than what he got last time. I think he was ambassador to Germany. I mean, maybe that he'll get that. He may even get a gig like ambassador to Russia. If he wants to be ambassador to Russia, let him have evening conversations with Lavrov. They can chat away about multipolarity and all those other fascinating international issues. I can see McGregor getting a position like ambassador to Russia. I mean, he was ambassador. Yeah, so it's a kind of a step up. He was ambassador to Germany, so now ambassador to Russia. But he's not going to be involved in any of the big decisions. If you're head of the National Security Council, you get to do the hiring. You hire all the people on that National Security Council. They're the people who draft all the documents. They draft all the policy prescriptions, and all the intelligence analysis and all the rest of the things that they do. So it's going to be a waltz. Mike Waltz is going to be doing all of that. And he's going to be meeting with the president every day, and he's going to be presenting policy options to the president. Now, it's possible, and there's a precedent for it, that Trump is going to get fed up with it. I mean, if he doesn't think that his national security advisor is doing a good job, in the way he didn't think that about McMaster and Bolton, he could get sick of Waltz. But the problem is like you're saying, we're doing the same thing over and over again. If he gets rid of Waltz, he's going to get somebody else, very similar to Waltz, but who'll be able to get on better with Trump. So I really don't have any great hopes there. Even if I mean, he got rid of Bolton. I mean, Bolton really was the worst. But then he got Robert O'Brien. I mean, O'Brien just wasn't quite as demented as Bolton, but hardly a great improvement. Anyway, DJ says, "Oh, thank you very much, DJ, for the dogs. Those hounds. They're just so awful. They give me such a hard time. So thank you so much, for thinking of them. They don't think of me, but it's very nice of you to think of them. Thank you." Cynthia, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for your generosity, and above all, thank you for for so much work that you did on Death in Venice. So we had a screening of Death in Venice yesterday, and it was a great movie. So it's still up on the locals board. Everybody should go and watch the film. And as you watch the film, read Cynthia's fascinating background information. There's real huge amount that I learned, and I'm sure everybody else learned from what Cynthia provided. And I thought that Cynthia, you would ask some question about about the film and about the the Man novel, which is indeed a fascinating um, novel. Um, I mean, the film is quite faithful to it, but the film is, I think, obviously because it's for a mass audience, is a little bit cruder, and a little more obvious. I mean, the novel is a little more subtle. So the film had the homosexual element was much more obvious in the film than it was in the novel. Um, but it's still quite an extraordinary thing for Mann to have done this, to have written a work like that in 1912. But the whole thing was kind of elevated to the level of art and to the level of Platonic dialogues about the nature of love and beauty, and so people could read it and enjoy it without feeling any particular outrage over the fact that here was this middle-aged man in love with a young boy, and was kind of following this young boy around. But yeah, but it's not just the film, but I think the novel itself is worth reading. But anyways, Cynthia's question was: Mark Sloboda said recently on a podcast that the U.S. and Israel would have had a much more formidable military take on the axis of resistance if they had invested more in missiles than in aircraft, which is why Israel kept all its manned aircraft far outside the range of Iranian air defenses. Otherwise, Iran would have shot them all down. What the US and Israel really need in order to take on Iran is to have plenty of long range missiles, something which they both sorely lack. Um, well, I mean, I think that um, the, the, I mean, the problem with missiles is still, or this, that Israel can launch um, missiles against Iran, um, but then you have the issue of the inevitable retaliation. Now, again, I mean, I think that the probably very few of the retaliation, would the retaliatory missiles would have got through. I mean, some would have got through, but okay, but probably not that much. But yeah, I mean, there's no question. I mean, missiles um, are a relatively inexpensive way of conducting warfare. I mean, inexpensive in the sense of human lives. Aircraft are a little difficult. They get shot down, which means that you lose pilots. But that's more or less the way the war in between Russia and Ukraine is also being conducted. Essentially, we're not getting too much by way of air power. No one's sending up aircraft because aircraft can get shot down. So it's essentially done in terms of missiles. I have my doubts that there's a real shortage of missiles. To be honest, I think it's more that that they don't really want to get themselves into missile exchanges with Iran. I mean, there have been some, but they've been limited. Um, but if they really start lobbing missiles against each other on a regular basis, on a daily basis, then it gets very serious. And then the United States will inevitably be drawn into this war against Iran. And I think that the Americans are reluctant to do that. So yeah, so I think that's really why that they've been reluctant to, you say, have involved more missiles than aircraft, which is why Israel kept all its manned aircraft far outside. Again, it makes sense not to waste your aircraft. I mean, because you lose your aircraft and then you lose your pilots. Israel doesn't like losing losing its men. So that wouldn't like. So it makes sense um, to use missiles and of course drones, but I think that it's still a question that the Americans are reluctant to to sign off on any major confrontation with Israel and Iran. Um, so yeah, that's my now. We'll see what happens with Trump. Um, I mean, Trump so far has his boast was that well he kept America out of wars. Um, but he has a problem on his hands. I mean, he's got two wars that he's going to inherit, and therefore you have to wonder how is he going to resolve them. And I have to think that Trump's instinct will be to to escalate. So that could happen. Um, um, so again, so there could well be more extensive attacks on Iran. I mean, everything that the people around Trump are saying suggests a real hostility towards Iran. They blame Iran for everything that's gone wrong in the Middle East. So it's so again, it wouldn't surprise me if there would now be some kind of an escalation in missile attacks against Iran, and then and then Iran retaliating against Israel. Because as I said, I think in the case of Ukraine, I think Trump's first step will be to try to he'll come up with this peace plan. I think the peace plan will be rejected by both Russia and Ukraine, and then he's going to escalate in order to de-escalate. In other words, he's going to try and suggest to Russia that this is really that you have no hope, that this is what you're going to be facing this every day, and therefore it's to your advantage to bring this to an end. And I think something similar will probably be done against Iran, because I think Trump and the people around Trump really do believe that the root of all the problems in the Middle East is Iran. Iran was behind October the 7th. Iran was behind Hezbollah. Iran is behind the Houthis. Iran. And that's why I think that, again, he will be tempted to escalate against Iran. But anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Then Steve Brown says, based on his picks so far, appears the Trump in chief wants to pivot to confront China at least more than Biden has done. No, that's true. That's true. He does want to confront China, but I don't think that he's quite figured out how to bring the existing confrontations to a close. That's why, other than by escalate, the escalate to de-escalate. Peter has said, "Oh, we should have some kind of a global conference and so on." And maybe Trump would like that, to have some kind of a Helsinki 2.0. But I don't think Trump was going to go for that until he's first escalated. I think once he's escalated, and then in the way served notice on Russia that this is what we're going to do, and we're going to make life really hard for you, then he hopes that he can get that Helsinki 2.0 conference off the ground. I think that's probably how he's thinking. I don't think he's going to say right now, "Oh, let's have the Helsinki 2.0." I think he's going to go through the various process of escalation, and then he'll try and go for a global conference if that's what he's interested in. But in terms of he wants to confront China, but I don't think he he's that means he's going to wrap up these wars, like very quickly. I think that overall he's thinking in terms of China, but the China thing for him is much more about economics, um, trade, and business. I haven't heard him talk very much about security when it comes to China. I mean, or the whole idea of confronting China in the Pacific. And I don't, in the Far East. I just don't see. He hasn't said that. He's only talked about when it comes to China, about trade and about tariffs. I mean, for him, China is an economic threat. Because I mean, now that's not the same with the people around him. The people around him are quite obsessed with China. They see China as a much more of an existential threat to the United States. But he hasn't said that. He's always just talked essentially that that China is an economic rival, and he has to address that as an economic rival. So I don't think he's thinking in terms of, well, boy, we need to get all our military hardware to China. In fact, on the contrary, when it comes to Taiwan, he's been quite critical of Taiwan. I mean, he's by no means said, "Yeah, we're standing very solidly with you on Taiwan." Biden has said that, but he has never said that about Taiwan. In fact, he's kind of pissed off with Taiwan. He doesn't think Taiwan does enough for its own defense. So I don't think he's sitting there, thinking about, oh, we need to get all our, our military hardware into Taiwan to defend it against the Chinese. And that's, there are people around him who do think that, but I don't think Trump thinks that. Anyway, Cynthia goes on, says, according to him, I guess that's Sloboda, this would also explain why the U.S. is reluctant to give any more ATACMS to Ukraine and is refusing to give any Tomahawks to them. The U.S. simply doesn't have enough of these missiles to give to Ukraine, especially when Israel is also in need of them. He also said that the looming war with China takes priority over either with Russia or Iran, and the U.S. must take action against China within the next 5 to 7 years. Otherwise, China will be too formidable for the U.S. to defeat them. I don't agree with any of that, really, because as I say, I don't think Trump is thinking in terms of China as being a potential military threat, and it's not a military threat. I mean, China is not, in any sense, a military threat to the United States. It's a much smaller military than the United States has. It hasn't fought any wars in a long time, and in fact, the last wars that it fought rather poorly. I mean, it fought against Vietnam in the 1970s. Didn't do very well against the Vietnamese in the 1970s. And that's just not what the Chinese do. I mean, if you just go through, even recent history, that just during the 20th century, I mean, they just were not a formidable military force. They were easily defeated by the Japanese. It was basically, the Japanese were defeated not by the Chinese, but by the Red Army. And of course by the United States, but in terms of the Japanese in China, it was the Red Army that defeated the Japanese. So I don't see that somehow China is a huge military force. I don't think in terms of its assets, it's in any way just in terms of a rival. It's a rival of the United States or of Russia. I think for Trump, China is an economic problem, and I think that's how he's identified it. That essentially China has become a kind of a dumping ground for American businesses who've been shipping jobs to China. So that therefore, China gradually builds up its economic capability while America becomes deindustrialized. That I think is how Trump identifies the China threat. I've never heard him in any way suggest that China is a military and a security threat to the United States, or he considers it a military or a security threat to its neighbors. He's never said that. He's always only talked about China as an economic threat. And I think that's going to be an important part of his administration. I think he is going to go with the tariffs, and he's going to try and essentially push Chinese products out of the American market. And obviously with the added benefit or intended benefit of bringing about an economic crisis in China, since it'll essentially have been overproducing it once it's no longer has access to the American market. So I see it like that. Now, I think how I'm not when it comes to the missiles and everything else, the Americans are providing hardware and the missiles to Ukraine. I don't think there's been any real, this is, again, this is just essentially propaganda by this neocon propaganda that, if only America can provide more to Ukraine, that somehow America isn't providing enough. America's providing an awful lot. There's a lot of hardware that's gone to Ukraine. I mean, what's it? I don't know how many billions. I mean, we're talking about, that's just from the United States, but the Europeans are providing it. I mean, so there's an awful lot that has been provided, and they are getting missiles. I think the only issue there is the restraints on the use of the missiles deep inside Russian territory, and obviously the fear that this could escalate. And I think that's the part that I think the Biden administration does concern itself with, and they've had a warning. They got a warning from Putin, who did say that if you use these long-range missiles on Russian territory, we know Ukraine can't use them. Therefore, we are assuming that essentially it's the United States that is launching missiles against us, and we will take appropriate measures. I'm simply, I do not think that somehow the United States is short of missiles, and even again when you think of Israel, I mean, what missiles is it using? It doesn't need these long distance missiles other than against Iran, and hasn't done very much so far. So I just, I'm not buying the story that somehow America's just running short of this. And again, we heard all this after the October the 7th attacks, and that was another spate of these articles and podcasts about how, well, that's it, now we've got a war with Israel, a war in Ukraine. America's obviously going to decide we need to go with Israel, so we're going to wrap up this war in Ukraine. So that didn't happen. So this again, this is this constant expectation that at any moment now, America's going to pull the plug on Ukraine. It's not going to do it. So somehow, there just isn't enough. There's not enough to spare. I don't see it. Anyway, Steve Brown, Flynn would have been much better choice than Waltz. Yeah, no, I think Flynn was very good, but he was set up. And I think he was very sensible. I think he knew a great deal about international affairs, and he was a kind of a level-headed person. I mean, again, absolutely demented when it came to Iran. Which I think, there are such people who are kind of, when they're absolutely fanatical when it comes to Iran and Israel, but they can think rationally on Russia. Anyway, Judy, thank you very much for your generosity. I really appreciate that. So Judy says Waltz and Stefanik, like Rubio, are bad picks. Okay, but all three voted against Ukraine funding. They have therefore demonstrated they can be shaped, though to what degree is still to be determined. Dooming them is not useful. Well, okay. I mean, then you can say that in the case of Waltz, he gave a recent interview um, and he talked about what does he want to do? He wants to squeeze Russia. He wants to increase sanctions on Putin, and he said this is a recent interview. This doesn't go back to 2022. He said recently that we need to lift restraints on the use of missiles, lift the restraints on Ukraine's use of long-range missiles in Russia. And that was very recent. I think I think early November or late October. He said this in an interview. The if you actually read his various criticisms of what Biden is doing, it nearly always boils down to that Biden isn't doing enough. Biden hasn't allowed Ukraine to win, and so when he comes and says, "Well, I'm going to vote against this package," it's usually because Biden hasn't come up with a strategy for victory. What's the end goal here? A lot of it is just kind of the quibbling that politicians engage in. He's not at all opposed to more and more military aid for Ukraine, but he's a politician, and as politicians, he wants to score political points. And so he wants to score political points against the administration. And so he scored political points by saying, "Oh, there's no, hey, there's no. What's the end goal here? We need more accountability for where this aid is going." But of course, there's never going to be any accountability. And as I say, he criticized Biden for not doing more for Ukraine. That was his beef with the aid for Ukraine. Not the principle of it, but that somehow Biden wasn't doing enough and wasn't ensuring victory for Ukraine and wasn't really spelling out exactly what he wanted to accomplish. So I don't see there's any principled stance. It was just he was trying to score political points, and that's fine. But everything that we know about Waltz, his entire political career, and everything that he has said about Ukraine, even before the start of the social special military operation, indicates a very, very strong, intense Russophobia, and absolutely strong intent that America has to do more for Ukraine. As America has to provide everything for Ukraine. America has to impose harsher sanctions on Russia, and America has to remove all restraints on the use of on Ukraine's use of weapons against Russia. That's his stance. So the fact that he voted against it is just simply that he wanted to score a point by saying that the Biden administration isn't giving Ukraine the wherewithal to win the war. So so I don't really take that seriously. And again, with Rubio, his issue was there wasn't enough for the border. That was his complaint. And he said, "Hey, I want to help Ukraine out. I want to do whatever I can for Ukraine." So now you can always say who knows what they're going to do once they hold office. They do this, that, and the other, and you can never predict. Just because you did something 2 weeks ago doesn't mean you're going to do the same thing. But the record of Waltz, Stefanik, and Rubio is that they are all hawks. They've all been foreign policy hawks. When you appoint foreign policy hawks, then you're appointing them for a reason. You want them to implement the policies that they have advocated. And again, when they come along with the critiques of NATO, what's the critique? The critique is invariably that the Europeans are not doing enough. They got to pull their finger out. They got to cough up more money, and that's what Trump has always done. And they know the language of Trump, and they're going to do this. And there's no question they're going to badger the Europeans to come up with more money, and it probably will work. But by doing that, you're actually making NATO stronger. You're not undercutting NATO, and no doubt Trump is going to go in and do his shtick of threatening to leave NATO unless every NATO member state coughs up more money, and the media will do their usual routine. Oh my God! Oh my God! Trump is undermining NATO. NATO's on the brink of collapse. This could be the end. Trump is threatening to leave NATO. We told you he was going to do this. He's threatening to leave NATO. This is the end for the West. But no, what's going to happen is that everyone's going to panic and say, yes, we're very, very sorry. We're going to cough up more money, and we absolutely all determined that we're going to spend 3% of our GDP for our military. So, and then Trump said, all right, well, now that you've said that you're going to do it, maybe we won't leave NATO. That's, it's a routine he's going to go through. And that's the thinking of Waltz and Rubio. And they're basically going to say, you need to spend more on Ukraine. You need to spend as much as we spend, which means there's going to be a lot more military aid going to Ukraine, because he's going to say, you got to do it. You got to step up. So yeah, so that I don't see any. I mean, if you had Waltz and Rubio and then somebody else, and you could say, okay, well, maybe there's just going to be a difference of opinion, and then we'll see which way it's going to go. But when you hire Waltz, Stefanik, and Rubio, who are all on the same page, even if they quibble about this or that Biden did or didn't do, then you can pretty much predict which way the policy is going to go. Steve Brown says Tillerson was a good guy, but the Chumpster did not get along with him. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think Tillerson was probably just in over his head. He really didn't have too much experience. Then he was quickly swept up by Russiagate. He didn't quite know how to handle all of that, and I think but he didn't hit it off with Trump, and that's hugely fatal. And then Danucki says, the great unlimited partnership between China and Russia is yet another big pile of bullshit. China doesn't give a flying porcelain saucer about Russia. It's only about their own profit and interest. They are squeezing the Russians dry on gas price discounts, all the while taking over their economy and imposing their yuan on them, making the Russians their little bitches. Some achievement. Yeah, I mean, I think that all of that has been wildly overstated, the whole strategic partnership. And again, we go back to BRICS, what has BRICS achieved? I mean, again, China is doing very nicely out of Russia, and China boasts about how it's not providing any assistance to Russia. Well, that's a very strange kind of thing to boast. I mean, you would assume that if you want to reorganize the world and you want your side, this is the China side, you want your side to be more dominant in the world, then you want to help Russia. You want to help Russia win this war and weaken NATO and weaken the United States. Because if Russia gets weaker and weaker, that's going to weaken China. And quite soon, China is going to be confronting a Trump-led United States, and it's going to make it very difficult for them because they're going to lose their access to the American economy. And that's the whole point, that you're going to lose access to American economy. And they say, well, that's so much for your big claims that you're this economic superpower. You're only an economic superpower because we've allowed you to get this free access to our economy. What are you going to do when you don't get it? And I think China really hasn't given that much thought, but I think that's what's ahead. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the strategic partnership, hey, God, even North Korea has done more than China, and Iran has done more. So, and indeed, even in terms of diplomatic support, it's not exactly been a full-throated diplomatic support for Russia's position. Anyway, Anne Marie, thank you very much for your generosity. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed yesterday's film. It's very funny because Man spent the last years of his life in Switzerland. So he lived in the United States really from about 1939. So I mean, he lived in Switzerland before he moved to the United States. But then he spent the last years of his life in Switzerland. He wouldn't go back to Germany. He really went off the United States, and then he kind of but spent the last years of his life in Switzerland. So yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, Anne Marie. Stone River says, what about Trump's campaign promise to end the Ukraine war on day one, if not before? Not serious, just hot air. Well, that was always very puzzling when he made those promises, because he can't do anything before he becomes president, because if he tries to do it, they're going to get him on the Logan Act. I mean, if they tried to get him on the Logan Act over a telephone call Michael Flynn made to Kislyak, they're absolutely going to get him on the Logan Act if he starts negotiating with Putin and Zelensky, and they say, hey, you're undermining the administration's policy. So there's nothing he could do. But yeah, he did in Trumpian fashion, in the kind of exuberant Trumpian fashion, said he was going to sort this whole thing out before taking the oath of office. Well, that's not going to happen. But as I say, I have no great hopes that he's going to succeed afterwards. I think that the arc is kind of bleak, because if he's going to go in with that peace plan, it won't fly. I think Russia will not accept it. Ukraine won't accept it, and then he's going to have to do something. He can't just simply say, "Okay, well, there it is. I tried. Let's forget about it." He's going to have to show that he has a plan B for bringing this war to an end, and that's why I do think that he's going to decide to escalate. But yeah. Steve Brown says it's Wall Street's military-industrial complex and their banks, as owned by the donor class, that set the policy of the former United States. That is not just doom, just facts. How anyone can still support the U.S. surrogate Israel is just friggin' amazing to me too. Well, that's it's very interesting that Israel, which is really in most parts of the world, and most people are really disgusted by Israel. I mean, that's just in terms of the public. But this is a real case where the public and elite opinion really thoroughly diverge. So elite opinion in Europe, at least publicly, is still wholeheartedly in support of Israel. But the public just sees this all the killing of women and children. This is horrific. The public says, God, this is our ally. This is who we're supposed to support. But then, you've got in the United States, It's just you're getting more and more fanatical. You had the Biden people who basically gave Israel a blank check, but that wasn't enough. You got to get these absolute fanatics in there who Mike Huckabee. I mean, the guy who was the previous U.S. ambassador under Trump, David Friedman, complete fanatic. So you're Huckabee. You got Stefanik. I mean, it's like these these people. Anytime you criticize mildly Israel, they just go crazy. I mean, Stefanik, I think, she said Israel must get everything that it wants whenever it wants it, without any conditions. Without any conditions. So America is supposed to provide Israel with all of its hardware without any conditions. So, in other words, it's an Israel first policy. America has to essentially carry out Israel's agenda. So America provides the weaponry, and there's to be no conditions, whether it endangers American lives, endangers American security. That doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what Israel wants. That's the position of Stefanik. So you then have the Biden people, who now seem quite, relatively moderate in comparison. And if Trump is going to go down this path, then what about all these imams? What about you made all this effort to cultivate this the Muslim vote, this Arab American vote, and this is how you repay them. Marty, happy Tuesday, George and Gagglers. Thank you so much, Marty. And Marty, thank you for posting that documentary about what's the boy's name? Bjorn Andresen. The young boy who was the most beautiful boy in the world, who played the boy in Death in Venice. So it was a very interesting documentary. I mean, to be fair to him, I mean, he doesn't look as bad as you might think. I mean, because obviously he's now in his 60s and he's got the long gray hair. But once you look at him, I mean, he's still a very handsome man. I mean, it's just if you just I don't know, cut his hair and removed his beard, you could see that he's still a very good looking man. But he's in his 60s. I mean, he's not gonna look the way he did at the age of 14. But it is a poignant story. So again, anyone who's watched the film, then they can watch the documentary. Thanks to Marty. Anyway, thank you so much, Marty, for your generosity. Judy, thank you so much. Judy says the plug was almost pulled on Ukraine when the majority of Republicans in Congress voted against Ukraine funding. These new picks are all part of the no faction, and the new Republican members coming in this year are even more anti-funding. Cut off the money and the war is over. Well, cut off the money and the war is over. That's undoubtedly true. It's the Senate voted overwhelmingly to send money to Ukraine. The issue was in the House, and the House members, they did balk about sending money to Ukraine. But then what happened? Johnson and Trump in support brought this to the floor. And once you bring it to the floor about Ukraine funding, since all the Democrats were going to vote for the money for Ukraine, for Israel, and so on. Well, for Ukraine, almost all of them did. For Israel, there were some reservations. But they had the votes. Yes, half or even a little bit more than half of the House GOP conference was against the funding. But it didn't really matter very much, and Johnson knew this, and Trump knew this. that the bill would pass overwhelmingly because you got all the Democrats and then you got half the Republicans. But yeah, it passes overwhelmingly. And of course, you had about 78 senators who voted for sending the money. But you're right. I mean, if you say cut off the money and the war is over, yeah, no question. The question, but the only question is Trump going to do it? And I'm saying that I don't think he is. I don't think this team would for one minute think about cutting Ukraine off, and I don't think Trump's thinking. There's just no indication Trump is thinking along those lines. When he talked to Zelensky, he made clear Ukraine is important to the United States. And I think that's does Trump want to bring this war to an end? Yeah, of course he does wants to bring it to an end. But is Trump going to do what people expect him to, which is he's going to pull the plug on Ukraine? I don't think he is. I think he's going to continue with this war because it's not really costing America anything. I mean, the analogy with Nixon and Vietnam just doesn't fit. Because in 1968, 69, Americans were actually fighting and dying in Vietnam. It was the Russians and the Chinese who were in the bird's eye seat because they weren't dying. So, they were happy to watch the United States getting more and more bogged down in a war without knowing really how the Americans were going to bring this war to a conclusion. It's a little bit like what Russia is now in Ukraine. So Nixon, there was a great deal of pressure on Nixon to bring the American involvement to an end and to get some kind of a conclusion, which you could say, okay, well, we achieved what we set out to achieve. So it's like that was the position that Russia is now in. Russia's the one who's really but suffering casualties far, far, far greater than what the Americans suffered in Vietnam. But the point was, the reason why Nixon was under pressure to bring that war to an end was that Americans were dying. And that's why the war was becoming very unpopular. Americans are dying, and people can't see the end game. How do we end this? Now, but in this case, it's Russians are dying and Ukrainians are dying. So why not continue? What's the downside for the United States? There might be a downside for Trump if he were to pull the plug on Ukraine, because if he were to pull the plug on Ukraine, he would immediately be dubbed a loser. He would be dubbed as somehow he has undermined American power and prestige. He's undermined the West and so on. That would be a downside. But here you can just keep it going as long as Americans are not dying, and as long as Americans are not involved in a shooting war with Russia. That would be a problem. If it got to that stage, that Americans are getting shot at by Russians and Americans are now shooting at Russians, then that's a serious one. And then there would be real pressure on bringing it to an end. But at this stage, I don't see any particular reason for America to lose. That's why the only people who keep saying that the United States is going to throw Ukraine under the bus, is going to pull the plug on Zelensky and so on, are all people who want Russia to win. And I want Russia to win. I absolutely want Russia to win. But I just don't see that there's any real pressure on the United States to pull the plug on Ukraine. And I don't see that this team that Trump is assembling will go down that path. Anyway, Anyway, Steve Brown says, known plastic surgery aficionado in South Dakota passed a law where criticism of Israel is illegal. Bad chick, man. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes. I think, yeah, unfortunately, that's true. That's true. Steve Brown says, Trump will just be more of the same, but at least he can walk and talk at the same time. Yeah, no, I think so. Um, I mean, you know, the um, what I think he would want to do, I think he would want to focus on domestic issues. I think you know he wants to make some kind of a lasting impression. I think he would love these foreign policy crises to go away, but I don't think he's going to do it in the way people would like him to do it. I don't think they would like him to pull the plug on Ukraine, or they would like him to pull the plug on Israel. Which of course he should do. Absolutely, he should do. And I would love him to do that. But I just don't think he's going to do it. I just don't think that he's wired that way, and that's why he hasn't picked the team. That if he'd hired, we'll have Tulsi Gabbard here. We'll have Doug McGregor there. We're gonna have Kash Patel here. This is my team. And again, I'll have my special advisor Tucker Carlson. He'll be my political strategist. And I think, okay, well, this looks very promising, but that's not the way it's going. Anyway, Stone River says Buddy and Apple are not big on Noam. No, I'm not big on Noam myself. Again, she's nice looking, and maybe I don't know. I don't know exactly why Trump seems to like her so much. I guess she's a loyalist. I think she was loyal. Really, in those dark days. I mean, if the dark days of 2021, I remember when, just after January the 6th, and they had a conservative a CPAC conference, and it was very questionable, really, what kind of response Trump will get and so on. And I think Noam was there, and she was, and so I think Trump prizes people who were loyal to him at his lowest, which was in the immediate aftermath of January the 6th. So I can see that. But why she got that gig? Why Homeland Secretary rather than, say, Secretary of the Interior? But maybe that's assigned to the governor of North Dakota, Burgum. Maybe he wants to be Secretary of the Interior. Yes. It's like, anyway, Steve Brown says they were against Dosh to Ukraine before they were for it. Marjorie Taylor Greene was the only one with principle, and I'm surprised she has not been more visible in this transition effort. Again, that's a very good point. I mean, if let's say Trump had appointed Marjorie Taylor Greene to the United Nations, I say, wow. This is big. This is really big. We're really moving into uncharted waters. This is really going to be a different tone to the policy, because then she would. I mean, I don't really know her position on Israel. I've never heard her talk about Israel, but she's been absolutely vociferous when it comes to Ukraine. And I think, okay, well, that's a big deal. Again, Marjorie Taylor Greene or McGregor. But this is just simply very orthodox, very Washington swampy. I mean, that's it. I mean, you have to say this is about as orthodox and as unimaginative as you can get. I mean, these are the hawks, and it's what you get is what you pay for. That's ultimately. Steve Brown says Carter also wrote Peace Not Apartheid about Israel, published in 2006. Yeah. The effect was such that at the DNC convention in 2008, the Dems would not allow Carter to speak at the convention and only allowed Carter to strut across the convention stage to wave to the crowd early on in the proceedings. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Carter has always been very good when it came to Israel and the Palestinians, and it was very funny at Camp David. I mean, Carter just couldn't stand Menachem Begin. I mean, he really liked Anwar Sadat, got on very well with Sadat, but just couldn't stand Begin. And he got into arguments with Begin about the Bible. He thought that Begin, misunderstood the Bible or deliberately misinterpreted what was in the Bible. And so that was really it was already the first indications really that Carter just absolutely couldn't stand the Israelis. Brzezinski was the same. He also was found these Israelis really tiresome. And I'm sure people have seen the little bit of footage from Morning Joe. It was only some years ago when Brzezinski was on, and Scarborough was talking about the Camp, the Camp David, not Camp David Accords, but the Camp David Agreement in 2000 between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat, and Scarborough, again, profoundly conventional mind, he said, Arafat, walked away from the greatest deal in history, and this would have given Palestinians everything. He walked away from it, and then you just watch, Brzezinski schooled him on it. It's just, but it just shows how much this kind of the conventional wisdom, how ignorant conventional wisdom is when it comes to the rest of the world, Middle East or everything else. And unfortunately, when I have to say before I forget that it's very much the case with the Republicans. I mean, with some exceptions, and I think the Republicans in the House, there's some very good people there, such as Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz, are good people. But by and large, the Republican caucus, within the House and within the Senate, take a very conventional view of the world. They see the world, it's good versus evil. America represents good, and the rest of the world just pretty much scum, other than those who kind of unhesitatingly support the United States. So the Europeans, they're only worth bothering with if they cough up enough money for NATO. The Brits, they're just sponges. The French, well, they're kind of useless. We had to liberate them in World War I and World War II. Germans, they'd better shut up. So that's the sort of the GOP view of the world. I mean, that isn't going to change. I mean, as I say, on when it comes to domestic issues, you can say, okay, on some, the GOP has some very sensible views on that, because they know something about domestic issues on the border and so on, and trade, and which I think is reasonable. But I mean, when it comes to foreign affairs, it's just they know absolutely nothing about it, nothing good can come from them. But yeah, going back to Carter, yeah, The Peace Not Apartheid, that was actually a good book, and he wrote a book before that, was it The Blood of Abraham? Yeah, he's that was he was very took a very principled position, and where are we? Yep, okay, and then we have. Stone River says about the ambassadors to the UN, usually senior career foreign officials. I was referring to other countries, not the US, i.e. her counterpart. Oh, I see. I thought you were talking about Americans. But as I say, even in the case of Americans, there were career foreign affairs officials in the past, like Thomas Pickering. But now they're mostly political appointees. And now they're even elevated to a cabinet position. So I think, I'm not sure, I think the cabinet position, I think it was Nikki Haley, I think Trump was, I think, the first one who made this into a cabinet position. I may be wrong about that, but I thought Trump was the first who made the ambassador to the UN a cabinet level position. But now it is a cabinet level position. So Elise Stefanik will be in the cabinet. I don't think it should be a cabinet position. It's ridiculous. I mean, you're not running any kind of a department, and you do as you're told. So you can't just say, "Well, I represent this major department of state." I mean, you're told how to vote, and you vote. Anyway, W. Baker, thank you very much for your generosity. He says, "Feed those hounds, George. Nice counterpoint on Vietnam, skin in the game, boots on the ground. We don't seem to have any physical involvement in anything here in the US. It's almost as if it's a complete virtual entity." Yeah. Our money is conjured out of thin air, and if we could offshore our piss poor material production, we'd do it in a heartbeat. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, and that's why all of these analogies that people come up with. Oh, the Americans did this and this to DM, or the Americans did this to Vietnam, and they're going to do the same thing with Ukraine. There's no comparison. I mean, it's just now you're absolutely right. It's a virtual war. Somebody else is doing the dying, and so what's the pressure for the United States to bring it to an end? If they're ready to go on dying senselessly, because at this stage it's hard to see what good can come out of this, short of if it's a complete Russian victory. I think that would be a terrific turn in world affairs. I just don't think it's going to happen. But other than that, there's no pressure on the United States. So therefore, why would Trump do anything? I mean, when they make these arguments, hey, this is good for the military-industrial complex. Hey, our companies, are going to get these big orders to produce more weapons and ammunition and shells and tanks and planes and missiles, and so we're going to make a lot of money on this, and we'll have jobs. And Trump will say, yeah, that's not bad, as long as we aren't getting killed. That's the only caveat. Anyway, thank you so much, W. Baker, and you're right, but we do it in a heartbeat. That's been the elite opinion. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Who cares? Ship jobs overseas. Well, I don't care. But again, that's something Trump, I think, will want to do something about. Which is essentially that I think that's the economic confrontation that I think he's planning on with China. Not a military confrontation. No military confrontation. There's no need for it. But I think there will have to be. I mean, that's at the minimum of what Trump is going to do is to actually force China's hand economically. And then Aristotle once says, "I think Trump did say that he wants to stop the wars because he wants to stop people dying. So he is dispositional against the forever wars, but the Israel lobby looks to be in control of foreign affairs, at least." Yes, he said yes. I mean, I think he has said that he wants to stop the wars. I mean, who doesn't want to stop wars? I mean, I think it's reasonable. What I haven't heard him say, and people always assume that that's what he has said. What I haven't heard him say is that I think we should pull the plug on Ukraine. And people always say that, he wants to cut Ukraine off and so on. He's never said that. Marjorie Taylor Greene has said that. Steve Bannon has said that. Matt Gaetz has said that. I mean, there are Republicans in the House who have said absolutely not one penny more for Ukraine, but Trump has never said that. People just are attributing these ideas to him. Again, when he met Zelensky in September, he said Ukraine is very important to the United States. Now, we're speculating about what might happen. I may turn out to be wrong, but I don't think that that's the way Trump is thinking. Anne-Marie says, is there actually a comparable organization of the kind of NATO in the world? And is it an exaggeration to say NATO is actually a parasitic, fascist, and basically illegal organization? Um, there isn't really anything comparable to NATO. I mean, the Russians set up that collective security treaty organization, and they have as members, they have Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. So it's a very pale imitation of NATO. But essentially, Armenia no longer participates in the collective security treaty organization. So that's basically it's a dud. And the other CSDO member states have done nothing for Russia. I mean, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan have done absolutely zero for Russia in this war. So it's hard to see what exactly this military alliance does for Russia. Russia did things for them. Russia helped out Kazakhstan when there were all these. It seemed like there was a coup in the works to overthrow the president of Kazakhstan in 2021. Tokayev. They sent their forces in and rescued Tokayev, but Tokayev has never really reciprocated. They've done nothing for Russia in this war. NATO is entirely parasitic. You're absolutely right. It's entirely parasitic because its raison d'être is a continual expansion, and of course, by continually expanding, it's creating threats for others, and then for others who face these threats react negatively against NATO, and that NATO then uses as justification for further expansion and further, contributions from NATO member states. Oh, look at how dangerous the security in the world is. Look at all these terrible, dangerous powers. We need to go on expanding. We need to go on finding new states to join us. We need more money into the coffers. So NATO kind of creates the crises that it then purports to address. Because of course they're crises, because if you keep expanding, you are threatening the security of others. So it's entirely parasitical. It's like it is a protection racket. There's always some NATO provokes the crisis, and then hey, you need to contribute. I mean, and that's exactly how gangsters operate. That's what a protection racket is. You create the threat to your security, and then you have to pay for that security. So it is entirely parasitic and fascist. Well, yeah, there were a lot of prominent fascists in the early days of NATO. Particularly when they inducted West Germany, the newly created West German state, into NATO. There were all these figures holding senior NATO position who had held senior positions in the Wehrmacht. All of that was, of course, overlooked, and everyone just, well, the Germans are now good guys. That was then. They're good guys now, so it doesn't matter that they did this and this for the Wehrmacht just 10 years ago. So yeah, I mean, absolutely right to say those are parasitic or fascist, and it provides no security for anyone because it creates crises, and essentially pretty much most of the recent wars were NATO generated wars. The wars in Yugoslavia, NATO generated war. Bombing of Libya, NATO generated. So, and of course, Ukraine, there would be no war in Ukraine were it not for NATO. So, there's no question. I mean, it's really, really important for Russia to win. My position is only that I'm not at all sure that Russia will win, or at least that Russia is in any way conceiving of a strategy for victory. I mean, that somehow it's kind of stuck in this mired in this attritional war, and I think that could just go on and on and on for years. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you, everybody who has joined us. Thank you for all of your fascinating comments and and comments on observations and ideas. I always so enjoy it because I'm always learning from what people say. We'll be back on Thursday, same time, and please come and with all your thoughts and observations. Then, in the meantime, anybody who hasn't watched Death in Venice, please look at it. It's on our locals board. It's well worth watching, and then watch the documentary, The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, immediately afterwards. So thank you for today, and we're going to be back on Thursday. Until then, good night. All the best. Bye-bye.